Cool, awesome. Welcome back from the networking break. I hope you've all been busy connecting with each other and hopefully visiting some of our booths as well in the background. Do definitely get to those. And now we've got a great panel for you from one of our amazing sponsors, Google. A little word on what's going over there at the moment. Google's UX specialists and designers work across platforms to create powerful visuals that highlight each of their products' unique personalities. The team's work touches billions of users every day while exemplifying one of Google's core principles: focus on the user and all else will follow. If you're keen to join a company like this, then meet some of their amazing team today and visit their booth area for more information. Those are in the background there. And now drop some emojis on screen. I want to see some emojis. Where are they? Yeah, there they are. Amazing. Clap out loud at home and join me in welcoming Iram Mirza to the UX live stage. Hey, Iram, how are you?
Pretty
Look at
good.
that.
Thank you so much for that
Amazing.
intro. Very
No problem.
excited to be here.
I'll leave it over to you. Have a good one.
All right. Very cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Very excited to be here. As Sunil said, my name is Iram. I'm a UX lead at Google. I've been in the industry for almost 2 decades, and I'm very excited that UX Live has created this time and space for us as a design collective to lean into this very critical topic, very relevant topic, I think, of UX representation at the leadership table. We have a stellar cohort of panelists from across the industry with a really diverse background. I think you'll love meeting them. They're here to talk about how design leaders can seize the opportunity of having a seat at the table, how they're bringing their unique perspective and special sauce to solving human user problems, proving their worth and ultimately changing the future of the company and the products that they're building. Before we get started, I wanted to get a quick pulse of who's in the audience. And we have I can quickly publish our poll so we can see who's in the audience, and it will give us a sense of who's here, and we can try to tailor our responses and discussion around this. So thank you everyone who has put it in so far. I'm just going to hide it. I think this is for the audience, but let's get started. I'd love for this discussion to be engaging and interactive. We welcome audience participation, and this group was talking yesterday about how we want to sort of bring you all into this chat. So feel free to leave your comments and your questions. We'll get to them at the end. We have time reserved, and you'll get a chance to connect with the panelists there. With that, I'll get started. Would love for the panelists to introduce themselves, talk about their name, role, and company that they're representing, and would also just like to hear from each one of you on what experiences or persons have shaped what good leadership means to you. And I will start with Jose.
Thank you, Iram, and thank you to the audience for their participation. My name is Jose Coronado. I lead the Global Design Operations team at JP Morgan, and I've been basically in every kind of role and level that you can imagine over the last 20 years. I think my perspective on leadership has been shaped in multiple manners, but I think one of the most influential ones has been negative styles of leadership that I want to avoid and prevent others from replicating. Things like micromanaging or microaggressions perspective. I think those are very detrimental to our teams. And I think the saying that goes along the ways of teams will inherit the personalities of their leaders are so true in every sense, not just in design. And if the personality is positive, the team will have a positive personality. But if it is negative, the team will have a negative personality or will inherit the negative traits. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great to hear that. Svenja, over to you.
Sure. Hey, everyone. It's really great to see you here. My name is Svenja, and I'm a UX researcher at YouTube. And I work on a range of tools that help creators create and manage their videos and be successful on YouTube. And I think I want to tell you about an experience I had where someone else's good leadership really came to show. I was working on a pretty ambiguous project with lots of stakeholders. So we had designers, content strategists, researchers, but also lots of other people who weren't really UXers. And everyone seemed to have an opinion on everything. So surprise, things got pretty messy. It got really hard to move forward. And then there were all of these expectations that kind of surfaced that UX was supposed to have all of the answers and know what to do. And my manager at the time stepped in and pushed back really strongly with some pretty senior stakeholders to create space for the team to really think and be creative and go back to the drawing board. And that was such a pivotal moment for me in my career, to have somebody create kind of a protective space where I can perform my craft. And that really meant a lot. And I also learned that you're not supposed to know everything. You can't know everything really. And what you can do really is remember that and remind yourself to just ask really good questions and appreciate and acknowledge the unknowns, and then come up with a plan for what to do about all of these gaps that might exist in your knowledge. And I'll hand over, or Iram, are you handing over or am I handing over?
I'll hand over to Trip. Thank you. Thanks for that, Svenja.
Hi, I'm Trip Odell. I am a senior director of product design at Pearson Education, and I lead our first direct-to-consumer products, Pearson Plus. I'm working on sort of evolving that. Prior to that, I've been at Amazon and Adobe and Microsoft, but I really started my career in teaching. I was an educator, and that's the story that I'm going to pull from today. And it's kind of a sad story, but it's kind of especially salient today with everything that's going on in Eastern Europe, about leaders being the person that your team needs you to be in that moment. Because it's not about you. And the story that brings that to mind is one of the most powerful pieces of leadership that I've ever seen is when I was a volunteer teacher on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, which is one of the poorest places in the United States. And in my first 10 weeks as a teacher, we suffered a death. One of our students committed suicide, and I was very close to that. I was in the emergency room with other students, and one of the Jesuit priests came in, who was at the mission that I was at, came in to say last rites, and the stability and gentleness that he exhibited in that moment was a great example of being the person that they needed to be. He's a normally very gregarious and funny person, but met people exactly where they needed to be in a moment where everyone was feeling desolate. And so I'm reminded of that today in an email I'm trying to draft for my team, to put that in context, because of everything we've been through in the last 2 years, this just seems like one more thing. And as human-centered people, that's an important message to put out there, is that we feel helpless and alone and desolate. It's great to be that leader in the good moments, but you also need to be there and meet people where they are with compassion, even if you don't agree with how they got there. To not lose sight of the human at the center of that moment. And that's probably the best leadership lesson that I've learned to lean on over the years.
Thank
That was
you.
beautiful.
Yeah, thanks for making yourself vulnerable and sharing that, Trip. It's very powerful. Tutti, I will hand it over to you. Tell us more about yourself.
I'm actually going to build on Trip's story, because the way that he spoke about his Jesuit leader experience really made me think about one of the most badass, fierce, and compassionate leaders who I know. Her name is Fiji Simo, and when I worked at Facebook some years ago, she ran the video team where I was leading design, and she has a heavy French accent. She's the daughter of a fisherman. Came from a small fishing village, but she was unapologetically herself. She would wear her designer clothes and her high heels, which, is not really something that you see a lot in tech. But for me, with her, especially being at Facebook at a time where we went through the Clinton-Trump election, and many other things there, she always showed up with empathy, with compassion as a human, and able to balance out both the sense of sustainable success and leadership. And I always think about her now because, she's many, many steps ahead. She's now the CEO of Instacart. But to me, she was unapologetically herself and unapologetic about speaking about her origins, her accent, and was always similar to what Tripp said, the leader who you needed her to be at every point in time. And wanted to build on that, but a little bit about me. I have my own business now. I'm a leadership coach, an author, a speaker, and I support startup founders and leaders in design, product, and engineering reach their professional goals. It's my second career. I switched after a 22-year career as a design leader, working at startups and design agencies, and of course, the big tech agencies.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Tutti. And maybe we'll get started with you with the first topic that I wanted to discuss, which is what table are we talking about here when we say UX at the table? What does this mean to you? And why do you think it's important for UX to be at the table?
Absolutely. I work with a ton of design and UX leaders. And what I hear, and this is very, very human, we all want a voice. We all want to speak. We all want to see. We want to be at that table. We want to be like at the table where all the managers are, or the table where the C-suite is, or where all the executives are. And look, if you can negotiate and get that in your job, amazing. Do it. Right. I was fortunate enough in some of my earlier years of my career to join a Series B startup and negotiate that design was going to be equal with product engineering and report to the CEO. If you can do that, great. But I honestly don't really want to talk about that. I want to talk about like Iram's question, which is think about what table you're at right now and what seat you have at that table. Like, what's the role that you have right now? You might be part of a design team as an individual contributor. You might be aspiring to be that leader and want that next ladder. You might be a student and just figuring out, hey, this is exciting. I want to come in here. Or you might be a senior leader and want to be like an even higher leader. But what I kind of ask is, if you think about a metaphor and you think about a dinner party and a table and all the roles that are played in there, there's like the chef, there's the host, there's the storyteller, there's the listener. What seat and role are you comfortable playing? And what is it that you and only you can do? And I want to say that because if you are starting out a designer and aspiring to be a leader, you're the only one who can put those pixels on the page, who can make that prototype, who can do that research and bring that to life. Own that seat in the table you're at, and then you can slowly keep moving up.
I love that you were talking about almost this scaffolding of the table. You don't necessarily, not everyone is going to get a seat at the table. It's not infinite, but there are many things that you can do to even support the UX rep who is there. And wherever you are, whatever altitude you're flying at, bring in your special sauce. And I love that we have some students here who are excited about entering this field. We have some aspiring leaders. So this is all really valuable information. Thanks for sharing that. Any challenges, Tutti, just building on that, any challenges you see that UX is dealing with for those who have made it to the table?
Some challenges really is, how do I show the value of design? How do I change the perception from design being pretty, putting lipstick on that peg, to really making it be an integral part of the strategic conversation? And I see us all yearning for that. And that's great. That's what we always want. How do you start with what you can show up and do every single day? Yeah, show up and make that thing pretty. But when you're making it pretty, also make it functional. They might not have asked for it, but do it anyway. Do the stuff that's your special superpower and strength and keep building on it. And they will see what we bring.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else want to add to that really profound answer?
I think one of the things it's with leadership is a loaded word because really when a team is firing on all cylinders, there's leadership at every level and there's various types of leadership. So everyone sort of defaults to, I need to lead the team. I need to be the manager. That's how I get to the room. And, people sort of, I call it the Pantone ceiling. You look up and it always looks beautiful right from the bottom, but be careful what you wish for. Because there's a lot of things where you're taking on management, and that's a distinct skill set from leadership. I think in terms of having design be understood, the trickiest part is trying to follow the rules, the rules that have been set down for engineering or for product, and to allow that to be injected upon how design works. And we actually work in a very different way. And oftentimes we go well outside the scope, and there's an obsession around measurement. But I see this all the time with feature sets, which clearly belong together, but they're like broken into the roadmap, and showing the big picture and then breaking it down, getting that forward-looking vision and breaking it down into something that could be minimally viable and testable. And people stop asking about the measurement of design a lot less when it's clear and when it's obvious and when it's like, how did you do that? And that you're bringing people along. And I think it's that can be done by a principal designer who's an IC and is invited to the table because they always inject something in there. And it's really about developing. It's not about the title. The title it might get you to the table. It will not keep you there. And it's about influencing without authority. And so that's, I think, one thing to build on there is be careful what you wish for and do the thing because that's what you love to do. If you have a vocation to be a leader and to shape people, then go management. Right. But that comes with trade-offs, layoffs, and all these other things. Everybody wants to be in the room for the cool decisions, but the hard decisions are the ones that really test your mettle. And you have to do things that you don't want to do. If you want to focus on craft and really elevating craft, do that and learn to grow your influence as an individual. And there are enlightened teams in tech like Google and Facebook that have that dual path. Right. So you do not have to choose it. You do not have to choose management as the only way to get to that table.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And just, like riffing off of it, in some of my conversations with you, Trip, earlier, you talked about communicating design in a way that leadership can grok and find insightful and relevant. And you touched on it a little bit right now, like, just thinking about the craft, thinking about, like what you can deliver. Anything you want to add to that? Anything you want to say in terms of, the unique value you think UX can bring to this leadership circle?
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes part and parcel to the way that design continues to evolve, right? I think people have gotten religion around what design is capable of doing. They just don't understand how to do it. And they want to engage us. But I think, and this is something that I pulled from my teaching experience, is that you have to meet the classroom or the boardroom where they're at in terms of terms that you have to start from what they understand. And you have to bring them along in that vision. I'm giving a talk on that tomorrow around storytelling, but it's about using the language and the concepts as a starting point from where they start and framing the context around why this solution is important. People often jump directly into the what and not the who and the why or the complexity, or they're selling the sizzle, but they're not actually selling the problem. You have to establish the problem and take them through that journey in a concise and clear way. And you leverage data, you leverage, even the language of like, hey, rather than saying, well, the affordances of this or that, get you this, right? And it's very designerly speak. If you say to a product manager, look, we are going to significantly reduce friction here and improve your CAC, your cost of acquisition of a new customer, and drive conversion rates if you do X, Y, and Z, and be involved and put on some of that business leadership, because we're evolving out of the design as a discipline to organizations that are human-centered, problem-solving discipline, organizations as a core business competency. We should be expecting that same sort of thinking from our product and marketing partners to the degree that they can contribute. From our technical partners, is that we're centered on solving a problem, because the metrics are always a trailing indicator of what people did, and framing that the data can't tell you anything. It's the story that the data can tell. Using that as part of your storytelling, or part of how you're framing the broader understanding and elevating the vision using artifact-driven design, that is a powerful way to get yourself invited back to the table over and over again.
I think there's something really insightful there. All of us, whether you're the student in the audience, or you're just starting out, or you're that seasoned leader, there's something that is uniting all of us, is that design collective that I talk about, which is we have we're always being user and human centric. We are always empathetic. We're trying to understand. I think if we just apply that same principle to the folks at the table, the people that we're working with, Trip, like you said, figure out the language and the vocabulary that works for the PM, the engineering, the business and strategy ops person in the room. And there's so much more influence that you can unlock there. There is definitely value to developing and showcasing your craft, but presenting it in a way that really speaks to them. I think that is the nut that I would love for all of us to crack. Anything else folks want to add to this?
Something I actually wanted to add, because if you're starting out as a designer, it can feel really intimidating to be in the room. Like, even I've been to many business school classes. When Trip says CAC, I'm like, oh my God, I don't remember what that acronym is. I feel dumb. I feel stupid. But remember that as a designer, you have empathy, you have curiosity. You can come in there and be like, hey, can you talk a little more about what CAC is? You can ask, hey, that metric, can you tell me how it ties back to the benefit for users? Because that's our superpower. It's that empathy, it's that curiosity. And that's why I think many of us are designers and in UX.
Absolutely. I just want to I love that term empathy, because it's also another word that I think sometimes gets overused in design. Like, most people have empathy, otherwise you're a sociopath, right? So it's how to ignite that empathy in others that design has a special power to do. And it's helping to frame the problem and understand. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds like my mom, or that sounds like I've been through that, right? Having them identify that, like we bag on our stakeholders around, well, it's you aren't the user, or your mom isn't the user, but it's them trying to connect and express their understanding of a problem they're trying to solve. They just don't have the language that we do, and helping that be the yes and moment.
Yeah. I think the key here is really finding that balance, because there are some designers that I'm inspired by that they are just so unapologetically authentic to their craft and really leaning into design. And going back to the point of storytelling, but they might not know, or they understand the business, but their point of view is start with the user first, everything else will follow. Focus on creating this really beautiful simple things. And I've seen those designers be very successful at changing roadmaps, changing strategies, getting more headcount, changing resource allocations, because they're able to pinpoint where user gaps are, what just feels naturally better. And that is the secret sauce that I think we're all bringing to the table. But so it's a slightly different, I think you just need to be unapologetically audacious and authentic when you're at the table. And I think everything else flows from there. But I love this discussion. I wanted to move on to something sort of related, and this is something that Jose, I would love for you to drive the conversation around, is from a business lens, what are some strategies that you've used to advocate for and increase more UX visibility and presence at the table? Because I know you've been at JP Morgan for a few years and you've sort of seen the org grow around you. How have you also seen and scaled the UX leadership representation?
Yeah, I think elaborating on what Trip and Tutti mentioned, it is absolutely critical that we learn what's important to the business. In the first part of my career, I used to think that we needed to increase the design IQ of the organization. And that is kind of a push, to try to embed yourself into the minds of the people that you want to influence. However, I have evolved to think that we need to increase the business IQ of our teams in order to enable them and empower them to be influential, to be persuasive, to have the ability to connect with those partners that we work with. I think a recent anecdote from our last year planning, we had we were going to grow. The numbers look big, and our perception was this is never going to pass. So basically what we did is, let's take a step back. Let's look at what the numbers of projects we did last year, what the budget was, what the new numbers are at the macro level point of view. So if it was 10, now it's 15, and we're growing by 50, well, we have a justification there. So kind of framing that conversation from the business point of view. If we just call it, well, we need 10 more designers, we need 10 more researchers, there's going to be a disconnect about that. But when we connect it to business investment, to the programs that we are driving, then we can have that influence. And at the end, we basically got almost everything that we needed for this year just by framing it in the correct manner. And I think as design leaders, it is our job to support our team development so they can also begin to assimilate some of these, let's call it business craft or business skills. Whether you're presenting a single screen, what are the business problems you're resolving, or what are the business questions you're answering? Not doing kind of the real estate tour of the features. And the same way, when you begin to manage like global programs, okay, what are the key aspects that you are framing in that global program discussion, so you can connect with the other people that you're working with. So I think those are some of the key elements. And just connecting to the first point that Tutti was making, what table are we in is key. But if we feel excluded or not invited, we also have the opportunity to build our own table and persuade others to come along for the ride with us. And I think this will connect with Joe Natoli's keynote, which is following our panel. You have more influence than you imagine. So it's a matter of getting creative as to how we leverage that influence.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Trip.
Well, I was going to say, to build on that, I think one of the things that's underappreciated in design, especially when we look at the metrics, and I have an anecdote for that on a project that I worked on about this time last year, is what we do as an organization, what we don't do as the organization is almost more important than what we do choose to do. Because when we're talking about dollars and cents, and there's a thing called opportunity cost. And I always think that a lot of the MBAs skip that section of, they skip that day of class when they talk about, like, if we're doing this, we can't do this, right? Or what's an alternative approach? And there's the notion of, like, as a designer, when you're looking at the lens of what the data is telling, a lot of people will use financial metrics as an analog for user metrics. right? And that's, if that goes up, that's good, or if it's down, it's bad. But what they don't necessarily look for is the holes in the data around that could, what are they not telling us? And there was a project that we were looking, we had a consultancy coming in, giving us all this guidance, and I knew it didn't jive together. And we were able to find the data that kind of undermined that case. And it wasn't necessarily about a win-loss. It's about what's the right thing to do with the resources that we have available. And I was able to make the argument for a months-long field ethnography study to understand what we didn't know, or what were broad assumptions around this person, that it's not part of the life experience. It's very easy to think that the world is like us. And even as designers, we fall into that. And it's sort of the Abraham Wald missing bullet holes of like, what are we not looking at that could actually change the way that we look at this problem? And that's where research, but also design, it's not competing. It's here's another way that we could get to the same outcome with a different approach. And that's the type of work that tends to pivot those roadmaps. It's not designing for the plan and we know what the future is going to look like. It's being curious and skeptical and solution oriented on, we want to get to this outcome. Let's focus on the outcome, not on the method or the means. And so those are I think that's another way that design can have massive impact.
Thanks for sharing that, Lens. I want to go back to something, Jose, you said around, just creating your own table if you feel excluded, if you're not seeing that inclusive environment, and hopefully, you're not all dealing with that. But I also see a few questions in this panel around, like how can leaders help young designers recognize their greatness and their superpower? One thing I see often is we have a lot of talent, and there are designers that and researchers and other UX disciplines, writers, motion designers that are doing amazing work, but maybe they're shy, or maybe it's like, a bunch of explorations that never really get to that final review with XFN leadership. And so they might be at a certain table, but there is value in elevating that. Any thoughts on just encouraging folks or how to create this framework and process maybe to help folks just share more design, more thoughts around this?
I love the notion of this table. And I think in many companies, it's important to think about what table can we come into and what allies can you bring in as well. So for example, if you're the designer and they need a mock, because a mock is needed before something can be coded, and you're bringing in and you have to present that feature, you can bring in the researcher. If you're lucky enough to be in an org that has user research, to talk about it. You can bring in the design ops person. You can bring in the content strategist. You can bring in other designers to be like, hey, we need to provide these different perspectives and different points of view at this table. Use what you have and bring in others. And if that's not the table that you want to be in because you're in an org and this is really hard to do, then find your allies of other designers so you can talk and ally and build it together. Create an org outside, create an org of Black female designers together. And these are all little ways that we start building our own tables.
The shape of the table is really important too. So in so much in corporate life or organizational life, it's a big long table with somebody sitting at the head and lots of people nodding, right? And I often joke that designers, when we get to the table, we get the seat with crayons and chicken fingers, because there's, we're not necessarily taken seriously. But I think like if you're sitting at that table, the seat you choose, I'm actually physically choose when we're in person, is looking at like sitting in the right place where you can make eye contact with people and you can connect with them and you can see the reactions in the room, and use that empathy that we've honed. But I think even in creating your own table, create a round table, like something that is it's not design led. It is we planned the party, but the party kind of went where it needed to go, right? Everybody, and it's open, right? It's open seating. So bringing people in and not sort of saying, well, we're not invited to your party, so we're going over here to do our own party. It's like, that's an open invitation. There's lots of people that don't feel like they're at the table, and lots of people with great ideas. How can we empower them with partnering with us, bringing an idea that we can help make better?
Yeah. Thank
Perhaps,
you. Go ahead.
yeah, perhaps to second that, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And, maybe, as the only researcher on this panel, I can definitely say throughout my career when, I was younger and throughout different stages, my table was the research table, and sometimes I was the only one sitting at it. So, I needed to think very early and very strategically about how I built those relationships with partners from other disciplines that doesn't really lean too heavily into that power asymmetry that comes with just the power of numbers that come with certain disciplines. So 25 engineers, and over here is Svenja doing research in this corner by herself. I'm exaggerating, of course, but I needed to very consciously think about how I can do my craft and tell amazing stories and create value for the team that is so interesting that everyone else feels like they're missing out by not working with me. And that's been a very long journey and a very rocky road, and often felt like I was pushing the boulder uphill. But I felt that that was kind of a moment when I succeeded in sort of providing a lens into a problem, or telling a very nuanced story that a user was experiencing that nobody had ever considered, because that isn't their own lived experience, or that isn't an assumption anyone had made. That those were moments where relationships kind of moved to the next level of trust and authority that comes with what we do and what others do and how we communicate with each other. So it was wonderful to see that by kind of building those relationships, the table that I had for myself got bigger, and I created space for other people to come and also sit at my table when they wanted to. And they kind of came out of their own initiative, which was a wonderful experience for me. Yeah, maybe just one anecdote to share from my own past.
Thank you. I love that you sort of corralled people in and brought them to your table. That is very cool. I'd love to just build on that. You are the only researcher at the table, and you have a really amazing background with your social psychology expertise. Just building on what you said earlier, like how are you helping creating that intersection between human and business problems through that lens of how you view your work?
Yeah. It's a fantastic question, Iram. So, I mean, ideally, a business problem that you may be trying to solve, either as a researcher or a designer, is a human problem. But I think, as you're already alluding to in your question, Iram, they don't always align, and clearly that's a problem. And I think maybe you can best explain that by telling you about something that I have experienced in the past. So, I was working with a client, and this was before I joined YouTube. And this client realized that they'd fallen a bit behind on the competition. And there was sort of this pivotal moment in their strategy that was coming up. This client was in the sports industry. They worked with athletes across all sorts of Olympic kind of disciplines, and they helped them train and get ready for really big competitions. So an environment where there was a lot of pressure and everyone was feeling that. And this client felt that they had to do something really big to catch up with the competition. So very clear kind of what their business problem was that they were trying to solve, and really get back to kind of the top of the game. And they shopped around a little bit and realized that the shiny, sexy new thing that really was, making a splash in tech right now was virtual reality. So the decision was really quickly made. This is going to be the thing that is going to save us, and our strategy and everything is going to be invested right there. This was a problem because at this point they kind of had a solution already, but they hadn't really figured out what the problem was that they're going to solve. This was solving their business problem, but not really for any of the users, the athletes, their clients they were working with. So they hadn't considered once, what does an equestrian need when training? Or what does a swimmer need when they compete? Or how does a downhill skier train? And what is most important to them when they do that? And I think this is, a story that I'd love to tell, because it shows, I think, really well why user research is so important. It helps you kind of define and deconstruct a problem that you're trying to solve. It uncovers kind of what users need and how they go about tasks that are important to them. It also helps you stress test a solution you're coming up with. So This links very much to what Tutti said. Bring a researcher with you when you're showing mocks or designs. Maybe you have already done testing. Research also helps you kind of figure out whether the solution is a good fit and whether you're solving it in the right way. But also once you've launched a product or a feature, it helps you kind of figure out, is this even successful? Is this healthy? What are the pain points? What are the things we need to iterate on or improve, even post-launch? So coming back to our story with the sports client, they luckily hadn't gone down too far this road where the opportunity cost or the sunk cost was so high that they couldn't come back. So luckily, they were really willing to kind of embrace a different approach. So as a team of UXers, designers, researchers, we were able to kind of come in and just approach the problem from a completely different angle and help them still build a virtual reality related solution. They wouldn't quite let go of that one, but the approach we took to kind of coming up with a solution that worked for the users was a very different one from kind of the onset that they had gone with.
Thanks for sharing that. It's an inspiring story, because I think many of us deal with the situation of, oh my God, here's the technology and look what it can do. It can do this. But working backwards to the why and what problem is solving is actually, it's difficult, right? Like when you're trying to unravel a prototype or convince someone that actually this is not the right direction, how do you do that respectfully? How do you do that? How do you build cred while you're doing it? I think it all boils down to just like, speaking that same language, having the voice of the user, bringing in insights, probably doing A/B testing. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to figure out something with AR, VR, but not that original story.
I think-
Sorry, go ahead, Tutti.
Oh, something I wanted to add and build on what Svenja was saying is that just this intersection of business and humanizing it for other people in the room, it can be so easy in a business meeting to be like, all right, how do we move the metrics? If you are, say, working on a feed and you want more eyeballs on it, like that can feel like the one and only thing. How do we get more people engaging? Just even the words are not people words, but the people who are all in the room, they are all people. So I think our superpower as designers and researchers is to say, well, hey, what makes you want to post more? What makes you actually want to like or heart or get an emoji on a conference that you're in? Let me tell you this story about someone we talked to. They didn't want to. They felt like they were being manipulated and could see a feed full of ads. What else can we measure for this sense of connectivity and safety and community that may make people want to engage more and post more? But let's start with the human part, and I think that's the soul of superpower of design and research.
Yeah, it's being curious in a difficult moment is sort of an act of bravery, because you've got to go against the grain and ask the uncomfortable question. And it's not usually a popular question, or you think it's not going to be a popular question. Then you suddenly start seeing people nod because they thought they were the only one, right? Or you ask what seems like a dumb question, and it's actually the right question to be asking. And I think, like, if you can change, that's where you can change attitudes. Like, we don't want to have a fixed mindset around who our business partners are. When I was at Amazon, there was a quote from Bezos around, when an anecdote and the data don't match, I trust the anecdote because there's something that the data is probably not we're not measuring the right things, right? And so when you can shift that, and that's, I think, where design can really turn the Titanic before it hits the iceberg, is asking the uncomfortable question in an empathetic way, can really help quite a bit.
Yeah, and I would also say it's so important, and I know this is similar to what you were saying earlier, Trip, that empathy or being user-centered are really overused words. And what I'm going to say is another overused phrase, such as bringing people along the journey. But it is really so important, because it is one thing to say, oh, we need to be user-focused, or oh, you all have assumptions. these are things that are incredibly difficult to realize without experiencing them. So I think a task for us as UXers is how can we help people within our discipline, but also people we work with outside of our discipline, whose collaboration we depend on to experience certain moments of, I guess, truth or revelation that help them pivot their own thinking. And I think that is one of the hardest things to do. Nobody likes to be told, oh, you're wrong, or be put on the spot with an uncomfortable question. But I think creating experiences for stakeholders to kind of live a moment that changes the way they think about something is something incredibly powerful.
And something else I wanted to build on that is that, especially for quiet leaders or people where there's a power asymmetry, where you feel like you're the least important person in the room, it can be really hard to step up and ask that question. You don't have to start there, though. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is building those relationships one person at a time. So if there is a PM or an engineer who has agreed to watch that user test with you, build that relationship with them, teach them, have them do it, and they may be that ally in the room. I think Tripp said earlier, leadership is influence. It's not your title. It's not like having that seat at the table. And influence is relationships. So just do it one relationship at a time, one ally at a time.
And it's really easy. I probably sound a little Zen guru, like, very soft skills. That's very easy to do in a friendly audience here. I have a temper, right? And I think the hardest thing as a leader is really managing yourself, managing your reaction in the moment when you feel triggered that I'm not being respected. And I think walking into that room, feeling like you're the lowest person in the room, it's almost like you have to, like, I'm often saying I'd much rather be respected than liked, because I'm going to say uncomfortable things because we're all here for the customer. That doesn't always work. And you almost have to armor yourself with saying, I don't care what my title is. I'm kind of a big deal. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say what it takes building some confidence, and people will vibe off of that confidence if you can back it up with the right argument. I think a lot of times we try to argue from the point of it's the right thing to do. Always sell to the greed. Show your stakeholders what's in it for them and how this reaches their goals, and you'll bring them along. But you actually need to, I think a lot of times if we try to make people, we're people pleasers, and we try to facilitate and, use the yes and. Sometimes a definitive, clear no, and here's why, will get you more of that respect, but it's always a risk. It's not safe to be a leader.
Plus one to that, we have 10 minutes left. I think this conversation could go on for a couple more hours. I also want to get to some questions, some really amazing questions here, but maybe just wrapping up, getting quick sound bites from all of you on what would you have done differently if you knew you were going to get that seat at that table, or when you started out. What are some things that maybe you just want to pass on? I can start. I think I just want to echo what Tripp just said, which is being comfortable having that minority voice. 20 or 15 years ago, explaining UX and that importance, maybe being at the table meant wanting to fit in. But I think this, more than fitting in, I think bringing in that unique perspective and being comfortable, acknowledging that not everyone agrees and you need to do more work to prove a point. I think, just getting comfortable with that was very important. It's something I learned. I'll hand it off, Jose, to you. Something you want to pass on, something you wish you had known earlier.
Yeah, I think designers, when I mean designers, capital D, so all-encompassing research and content and all the other disciplines, we are very protective of our tools and our craft. And we argue empathy, but we alienate the people that we work with. So I think a way to expand your sphere of influence is to try as much as possible to remove the negative aspects of the business partner doesn't understand me. They don't get it. They cannot play in my sandbox. To how can we collaborate together? How can we co-design? How can we reach decisions together? And what can I do to influence that person rather than arguing the opposite perspective? I think those are key traits that I have learned over the years that have increased my own ability to lead, and also the ability of the people in the teams that I have been fortunate to be part of.
Thank you for sharing that, Svenja.
I think what's really helped me is acknowledging just how real imposter syndrome is and understanding how that works. And working towards kind of snapping out of that. I think I just saw in the comments, I think Caitlin Davis just posted this, learning when to know when to change the seat at the table. I think that was a really important lesson for me as well. Just realizing this, I wasn't having a good time. I wasn't enjoying what I'm doing, and I love what I do. So what is going on? So also having the guts really to make a tough decision, even though it may look like you're actually in a good place. The trajectory that's ahead of you is exciting or good, or whatever that might be. But walking away from something just because it doesn't feel right, I think is a tough thing to do. And I think it takes courage.
Thank you for sharing that. Trip?
I think it's the hardest thing for me to learn, or what I wish I'd known, is don't chase the title. It'll be there when you're ready for it. And that really comes to getting your head right around what the nature of your role is. In terms of like your role is actually to be there to grow and protect the team, but also to push them up and have them be the win, right? Have them have the wins, get them the seat at the table, because a good leader makes themselves obsolete or actually grows into a different role, because they've created such an amazing group of people, and that's your job, is designing designers, not leading the design. And so I think that, and I think also they say pick your battles, but it's like actually be intentional about the battles you're willing to lose, and knowing why you're going to lose that battle going in, because that's the part that separates a good leader from the leader that's there for, they came with the band, right? Like, like how are like the one that's actually going to elevate you. And I think also follow leaders that are worth following. If you have to know how to lead or you have to know how to follow in order to lead, because good leadership is apprenticed, right? You need to learn from people. I think Jose made the point around, he's seen so many bad things. Find the good leader, and it almost doesn't matter what problem you're solving. You will learn more from a good leader. Follow them from company to company, because a good leader get more likely to get fired than not sometimes, because they've picked the battle they're willing to lose.
And having that authenticity. Thank you, Trip. Tutti.
Yeah, I love what Trip said about don't chase the title. And I wanted to broaden it to be like, power asymmetry is real. You might be the only Black designer, the only queer designer. You might think, damn, I'm not a white male. There's these biases, conscious or unconscious, out there, and they exist in tech, and they will continue to exist. So what we do through this is know and understand your strengths and what you are good at. Yeah, we all feel imposter syndrome, and damn it, you belong here as a UX person in this organization. Know what you're good at. If it's doing the research, if it's asking the questions, if it's making that mock, if it's those beautiful animation and prototyping skills, ask your best friends at work, ask your boss. and keep telling yourself and reminding yourself, what is it that you're really, really good at?
Thank you for that. There was one of the questions that really spoke to me, was from Cynthia, on any advice on building confidence if you're feeling like the lowest person in the room. And I think, Tutti, you just spoke to that, which is, that confidence will come with developing a skill that is unique to you, harnessing that, figure out when you're going to present, when you're going to showcase, who you do that, what alliances are you building. Another question I think a bunch of folks have asked, as leaders, how to support young designers who are moving into this career, from a framework perspective, from an industry perspective. What are we doing to create, to be the giants that this new crew will stand on our shoulders? Any suggestions on that?
I could. Oh, Tutti, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jose.
I think we're at the juncture point where we have a lot of young talent, and we as leaders need to make sure that we create the opportunities for them. If we don't do that, we will kill a generation of future designers, future design leaders, and it is our utmost responsibility to not be responsible for that, but actually to be responsible and to be supportive of creating that next generation of designers.
I have one magic answer that will answer both questions about the confidence and about the how do you support others. So 46% of you said you're just starting out and aspiring to be a leader. How do you build your confidence? Help a student. Be a mentor to someone who's in design school. Write what you've learned as like, oh shit, this is my first 3 months in a new job. This is what I learned. Share your story and help someone else. There are so many aspiring designers out there. That's how you build your confidence. That's how you learn what you're good at. Help others. There's nothing that builds your confidence like that.
+1 to that. I think we have time for maybe 30 more seconds and one last question, which is fostering and championing diversity and inclusion within a leadership team. I love that question. Thank you so much, Anna, for posing it. I'll take a crack at that. I think the power lies with all of us. Making sure that as you are hiring, whether it's internal or external, make sure that your pipeline is diverse. Make sure that you have those goalposts and those checks and balances to say, have you talked to a diverse set of folks? Is the interview panel diverse? Not just the people that you're interviewing, but the people who are interviewers. Are they bringing in different perspectives, and making sure that you have that lens, you're prioritizing it across different levels across the organization? Because I think the only way to get diversity and inclusion within an organization is if folks see that equal representation at all levels. It's very hard, let's admit it. But I think all of us just need to make that noise. If you have friends you want to recommend, make sure that you keep bringing up that diversity, bringing in, folks that you're meeting, bringing in those resumes that capture diversity. With that, I think, sorry, Trip, go ahead.
I was just going to build on that, because I think that's the one thing around supporting designers is that we hold the bar too high for coming in. You need to actually be willing to hire people that suck, because we all sucked to begin with, right? Like you only get better at it with practice, and that frees you up to, like, it's advocating within your organization for opportunities to bring in people that don't fit and finding a place for them to fit and to be higher up. So diverse, I advocate a lot for neurodiversity. I look like the poster child for privilege. I grew up with a lot of challenges with neurodiversity in my own life. And so advocating for that and finding the crack in the system to let the person who might have dropped out of high school or might be coming in as an administrative assistant who wants to be a researcher. I've done those things, but it's because I fought for the resources to be able to take that risk and then to be a teacher, to grow them.
Yeah. So I see Sunil joining. He's going to tell us we need to stop, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you to this incredible panel. What a lovely conversation. Audience, thank you for this active participation. I was getting lost in some of the great insights and banter that was happening there. I want to be part of Team Overdressed. But thank you all for being here. It was lovely. Hopefully we get to do this next year in person. I'll hand it back to you, Sunil. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Iram. Thanks, Jose, Svenja, Trip, and Tutti. Amazing. The chat was on fire. Such an amazing panel. I think I can speak for everyone else who will be watching the recording back over and over and over again. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to everyone in the audience. Next up, we've got Joe Natoli talking about leadership as well. So we'll see you there.
Thank you. Good luck to. Bye, everyone.